The suspect is from Uzbekistan, which is a part of the world that in many cases described as being a hotbed of radical Islamic activity. But we're also told that he was radicalized here in the United States.
Yeah, completely so. And interesting, early on in the airstrike campaign in the early part of 2000s, Uzbeks had the highest body count in those airstrikes, mainly because they were great fighters. They merged into places like Afghanistan, even along the Pakistan border, and were eager to get into that fight. And what was fascinating was that the groups around there, some of the local tribes, did not really care for the Uzbeks being down there. They actually looked at them as foreigners. And lots of information was passed along, and I think that's why they ended up getting targeted more than the other ones. They are used effectively on the battlefield still all around the world. This individual apparently either may have had some connection back there, we don't know yet. I would leave that as an open chapter quite yet, but also seemed to get here, try to fit in. Something happened in all of those travels, and I'm going to guess that somebody gave him permission to do what he did in a spiritual way that allowed him to continue on. We see this in case after case after case, even in lone wolves. It's a simple email, it's a simple communication. That's what really investigators are going to need to find out. Where was that spiritual guidance? Where was that individual that said it's okay for you to do this and take those lives? That always happens in these cases. Now we just have to find out where that happened in the United States. And candidly, if he had those moves around like that, he's a perfect profile for recruiting of somebody to push him into this radicalization phase. Couldn't quite fit in, couldn't quite fit in. He's exactly the kind of person that these folks are going to look for and try to reach out and touch. And again, doesn't mean it was a heavy hand. It doesn't mean it was intense. It doesn't mean that ISIS was meeting with him every day. Probably none of those things happened. But somebody along the way helped him get that switch flipped that allowed him to believe that this was his duty under his faith.
All right, Phil.